It's really nice to see a lot of friendly faces in the audience here. Um, so I'm Peter Dixon. I built one of the sort of earlier successful defense tech companies in the space. But the thing I think that's important about this moment in time is about 18 months ago I was in Ukraine, and I had always thought. First of all, let me just get a feel for the room here. Um, how many how many folks in the room are entrepreneurs? Okay. How about folks that are already at a big company? Folks that are looking to start a company? Okay. Folks that are at a defense tech type company? What about a dual use? I know sometimes those get used interchangeably. Okay. How many veterans in the room? Okay, amazing. So really cool group of folks that's together here. Credit to the event. So look, about 18 months ago, I was in Ukraine, and I've been in Iraq, I've been in Afghanistan, I've done counter cartel, I've seen a lot of really messed up situations, and been with a lot of folks who have seen really messed up situations. And I always thought that the 1,000-yard stare thing was just kind of a myth, right? Because I'd never really seen it. And coming into Ukraine, meeting some of the veterans that were on their way out as we were flying in through Poland, double amputees, really that 1,000-yard stare. I thought, okay, that's these guys. They've obviously been through the ringer here. As we got to the front lines and started meeting the units, everybody had it. And it was really at that moment that I realized that combat is not our combat. For those of us who are veterans of the global war on terror, and everything that we experienced, the level of warfare now is a whole other level. And we were meeting these groups, mostly volunteers, and they volunteered in groups of maybe a dozen or 24 students, folks that and many of them had worked for American tech companies. But they volunteered as like a group of students or a group of people that had worked at a company together. And they all went in as a group, right? Almost like if you think about the wars of our past, how people used to volunteer, where you're going in with the folks from your village or from your town. And what I realized talking to these kids, and really they were kids, is that there were 2 or 3 of them left out of the dozen or 24 who had joined. The Russian units have been destroyed and turned over 7 times, meaning if it's a parachute regiment, the Russians who knew how to deploy parachutes jumping out of planes, they died 7 iterations of that unit ago. That unit was destroyed at least to 50% and rebuilt 7 times. But the Ukrainian units had all been rebuilt 3 times. At the time, there were 40,000 small drones in the air at any given time. When we were there, and I was there with a bipartisan group of members of Congress who went all the way up to Kharkiv. And one of the members of Congress, asked, this was, 18 months ago, asked, hey, how many of these drones were coming back? And they said, no, these are all one-way drones, right? They're causing 97% of the casualties on both sides at the time. I think it's probably grown today. And so what clicked for me, because I had always felt, if anybody else has ever gone into other countries and trained the local national security forces, you have a justified sense of how good we are. We're really good, right? And I just had this moment where I realized it doesn't matter. I led a unit of scout snipers in the Marine Corps in combat in Afghanistan, and we were really impressed with how good we were. I mean, we were good. It does not matter how sneaky you are on the battlefield. You can't hide from a thermal drone, right? And so I went, oh my gosh, it's not just that the Russian Navy has been cleared out of the Black Sea and that these things the size of couches with a jet ski engine on the back and a Starlink on top and a torpedo on the front have sunk 1/3 of the Russian tonnage, right, in the Black Sea, and everything else is hiding in port. But somehow we're still pretending that our Navy could be able to operate close in and be okay. It's that if you took a Marine battalion or the 75th Ranger Regiment and you drop them onto the battlefield of Ukraine today, they would likely be wiped out within 72 hours. Recently, there was a war game. Forces attempted to attack during the war game, right, a Ukrainian unit that had been pulled off the line in order to help level set the NATO forces. The NATO forces were completely destroyed, and the Ukrainians didn't suffer a single casualty. In fact, the NATO forces weren't even able to get into contact with the Ukrainians. So if you are interested in being in this space, right, and you're thinking about what does service mean, whether you haven't served and you're thinking about how do I do something, how do I create success, financial success for myself or for my family, but how also do I do something larger than myself? How do I serve a mission? And right now, the country needs you, because we have all grown up during this period of Pax Americana, where we have enjoyed the prosperity from a Western dominated and stabilized security paradigm. And right now, that security paradigm is breaking. It's breaking in front of our eyes. And it's not, unfortunately, the Lockheeds or Northrops that are going to be able to replenish that. We just shot half our arsenal in Iran, and the traditional defense providers are going to take 7 to 9 years to try and replenish it. Our ability to fight in a Taiwan theater went from 7 days to 3 days before we're bingo, before we're Winchester on ammunition, right, on smart weapons. So our ability to sustain what we've all grown up with taking for advantage is disappearing. So if you haven't served and you're looking to create an opportunity for yourself financially, but also to make a difference for the country, the defense tech or dual use ecosystem is a great way to do it, and it's an important way to do it. If you're coming from national security service or military service, right, you can try and run from that itch, but it's really hard. It's really hard to go and work for a company that's, creating the next sort of pizza app, right? Because you miss that sense of mission and meaning in your life. And so this is likewise a great way to do it. Now, what I will say here, and I'll just try and give some really practical advice on how to be successful in this space. If you are a single entrepreneur, I would highly suggest that you look for ways to accelerate what you're doing. Go to things like Tech Connect, right, and find amazing technology that's coming out of the labs. And find a way to license that, which you can do as an individual operator, as a sort of an entrepreneur, and then find a way to start building a company around that and pull it back. If you're looking to join a larger company, this is some really sort of tactical, practical advice here, is I would say it's very important that you understand, are you providing value because you're putting hands on keyboard, right? Or you're bending metal and you're building the product? Or are you in sales? Because there isn't much between the two. There's only two value creation centers really in a company, and it's those two, right? Now, Stanford Business School and everybody else won't teach sales because you can't get tenure in it. But even as a CEO of a company, my job is to be in sales. There is an art and a science to it, right? Military folks tend not to be good at sales. Shockingly, you think we would be good at going for the jugular, but we're always doing one more meeting. And so, and we always assume that in sales, you're just sort of born with it, because we see people who feel like natural born salespeople. But it's just like being a professional athlete or anything else. You really have to train at it. So if you're looking to be in a role of maximum impact in one of these companies, again, you're either creating the product or you're selling the product. If you're doing the latter, you have to be a professional at it, which means that you have to do things like study up on it, read books, watch podcasts, record yourself on sales calls, which is super awkward. It's all of those things. So for the veterans in the room, I would just urge, right now I see a lot of veteran transition things and they're amazing. They tend to focus on things like how to dress or how to update your resume so that a private sector company can read it. But the thing that I would say to you all is a hiring manager, their job is to do risk assessment. And what they are trying to assess is not whether you have the leadership skills, because they assume you have that coming out of the military, or that you're going to outwork everybody else. What they're looking for is how long it's going to take where you are a net negative on their books to how quickly you can learn the product and then sell the product and become a profit center, right? That is both a reflection of your network and your ability to actually do the job in sales role. Now, look, if that message doesn't apply to you directly, I would just ask you to hold it a little bit, because there are undoubtedly veterans in your life that are transitioning, and this is something that we innately do not understand as a community. So if you can push that out, that's super helpful. Okay, I'm bouncing around a little bit here, but I feel like I have an obligation to say that as often as possible. The other thing that I would just say that's probably relevant to the larger audience here is you have to have the why as an entrepreneur. This isn't something that I ever really say on the record. When I was in Afghanistan, there was a time where I was frustrated by my guys getting hurt or killed, and we had a suicide bomber. That we knew was laid up in mosque housing. And so I had everybody stay up in their vehicles, and, I was going to be the only one who was getting out, right, and taking point to go after that suicide bomber. I thought there was a pretty good chance I wasn't coming back from that. All the rest of the stuff that happens like that, right? You don't really have time to mentally prepare. But that was the one where I was, 24 hours before that op, when I called my folks on the sat phone and tried to say goodbye to them without really saying goodbye. So for me, this all, when I look at the guys I lost and the promises that I made to them, this is all borrowed time for me. And that is my why. You need something like that, because if you are an entrepreneur, you make these decisions to start on something that feels like a good idea at the time, and it's just going to be 1,000 times tougher than you expect. There are going to be 1,000 good reasons why the smart money is to throw in the towel. And if you don't have that, that sense that you cannot fail, right? That you will just run through the walls, right? That it is as important that you continue as breathing. You are not going to make it. Right now, if you're, for those of you who are saying, okay, I can balance the family life, or I don't have a family, right? That changes over time. I had the other, I guess it was a little while ago, but my daughter had come in and seen me at breakfast, and she just started crying because she hadn't seen me in 3 days. And I was in town, right? That's just the entrepreneurial journey. And so if you sign up for that, your skin and heart in the game, you have to be willing to pay that price. And there is no good way to pay it. The why has to be so important, right, that you stick with it against all odds. Now, we're making, just money for money's sake, or whatever the thing is. It's hard to have that why, which is why you see companies create all this mythology around the company, or they say that the company's family or whatever else. They're trying to impose sort of an artifice that this is really important. Most of the time, between us, it's just not. But the dual use or the defense tech mission, it is, right? And the odds are here, the venture capital community has put a ton of money into this, mostly blindly. A few of them understand what they're doing. Most of them took their crypto funds and pivoted it into defense tech because they saw a buck to be made, and they treat it like SaaS. They really don't know what they're doing, right? Few folks do who have been around for a long time. But that money is mostly dumb money, and the things that it funds are mostly going to end up on the cutting room floor. That's horrifying to me, because traditionally I know that the Department of Defense spends less than 1% of the defense budget on the folks who are the trigger pullers who take 80% of the casualties. But the VCs, God bless them, didn't do that. They put the vast majority of that $100 billion into technology that makes a difference for the warfighter, right? And is relevant on the modern battlefield. But that technology, all that capability includes SpaceX, Anduril, and Palantir, and it has 4% market penetration, right? We're not getting there. So that question of how do we pull those warfighting capabilities, which you can get funded, into programs of record, right? So that it's actually sustained. That is our question. And that is the question that is going to determine whether our kids, right, are able to grow up in the same type of world, the same peace relatively, and the same relative prosperity that we all got a chance to grow up in. And that in a more positive direction, that's not likely to come from Washington, D.C. or the Beltway, right? That's likely to come from right here in the heart of San Francisco and Silicon Valley. It's us who have always managed to disrupt industries. This industry matters more than any other industry to be disrupted in our lifetimes. And it's this group of people who are going to do it. So thank you for being here. I think maybe I have a few questions, and I'm happy to take a few. That's a great question. So let me repeat it back to you, and you can tell me if I missed it. What type of technology, if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking at the table setting of everything that's out there and trying to make a difference? First of all, I would ground it in, the venture-backed or tech ecosystem can almost, in some cases, it can operate without gravity, right? Where you suspend disbelief and you can go off in new directions. That's amazing because you can go out and try something new, right? But it also means that you can misfire and go in the wrong direction. And so I would heavily look at the relevant technologies on the battlefield today. I would stay away from drones because the number of companies that are crowding into that space is huge. And I would look at the peripheral technologies that are around that space, and I would pick something there, right? So, acoustic signatures to be able to put, listening devices across a battlefield and then be able to pinpoint Shahed drones coming in, right? That is something, for instance, that the Ukrainians doing, but to my knowledge, no U.S. company is yet doing. So I would look for niches like that where you can really make your mark. I would move quickly, and then I would make sure that you figure out how do you get rolled up into sustainment in the U.S. government so that even if it's the right idea, it doesn't just live in the defense innovation ecosystem, right? Which is about $3 billion a year. A bunch of us helped stand up Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, or AFWorks, or Incutel, which created the defense tech ecosystem. That's great, but that is almost entirely disconnected from the programmatic dollars from Congress that go into the big systems of record. So you need to figure out as quickly as possible how to get from one to the other. So does that help answer your question? Amazing. Thank you for asking it. Thank you to the crowd here. This was amazing.
Thank you,
Good to see you
Peter.
all.